Hey, what's up you guys? You're watching Team APS, Paul here. Today I wanted to talk about a topic that's kind of interesting. It sort of passed my mind. I figured I'd share it with you guys, and that's Yu-Gi-Oh! Sort of duelist integrity. And that might sound cheesy, so allow me to explain. What I'm basically asking you guys and sort of just talking about is to what lengths will you go as a duelist? Like, you know, what is sacred to you and what do you expect of your opponents? And this just means like while playing, so not so much out of game, but just definitely like while you're sitting across from a table from an opponent, you know, what will you stoop to do to win? And what would you expect your opponent to do? And this doesn't just mean cheating. I mean, this literally can encompass a lot of things. So, got my notes here. Kind of impromptu video. So like basically the idea is, are there certain decks that you will or won't play? I know a lot of people have sort of a bit of a moral system when it comes to decks. Some people won't netdeck, for instance. They don't believe in the idea of like going online, taking a deck list and just copying it card for card and playing it. They feel like that's not their original creation. They think that's stealing. You'll see loads of, you know, comments on deck profiles where people are like, you stole this build from so-and-so or another. This is just a cookie cutter build like everyone else plays. So some people want to play their own thing. But to what extent are you like willing to not net deck? Is it like 1 or 2 cards difference isn't net decking? Or is it like, you know, you have to play an entirely different deck? Let's take, you know, Pendulum Magicians, for example, or Spirals, you know, 60 card Lightsworns, all popular decks right now, dinosaurs. So a lot of those decks are going to be topping events, you know, here in the next few weeks, most likely. And it's like, what, you know, is playing Pendulum Magicians considered like net decking? Or is it that you have to play Pendulum Magicians specifically like a certain way that's like very different from the norm and that's not net decking? Like what are kind of the standards for you? Like as a player, if you're gonna build a deck, where do you go to find information? Do you consider like just looking at deck lists online to get inspiration to be net decking? Or is it something more? You know, how's that go for you? And also what types of decks will you not play? I know a lot of people don't believe in playing like solitaire decks. They think of stuff like Chainburn, stuff like Exodia decks and Mill decks. A lot of people, kind of their like moral code of Yu-Gi-Oh! Says they don't play those decks. But do you expect your opponent to? Do you hold your opponent to the standard of they shouldn't play this, and if they play this, they're somehow like a bad person, or, you know, they're not as good of a Yu-Gi-Oh! Player? Like, is that fair to assume? Because just because you wouldn't play a deck doesn't mean that like it's a bad decision to play it. And that's something that I think a lot of players maybe don't consider, is like, you know, just because maybe I won't play Chainburn at an event doesn't mean someone else like won't either. And so if I sit down and my opponent is playing Chainburn, I have to accept that that's a totally viable, legitimate, like legal strategy. They can play it. I see a lot of players complain because they'll be like, oh, you know, this person's playing a solitaire deck, a degenerate deck, a helmet deck, whatever. But like, you know, those are all legal things, for me at least. And another good example is, you know, some people like to play meta versus non-meta. So like, are you one of those people who will just play the most popular deck? Or do you play the not so popular decks? Is that like your rule you live by? Like, I will not play meta decks. Like, no, stop, I can't play a meta deck. Or is it just more like you want to play it because you like it? There's so many factors that go into things. I don't think enough people really consider like what their moral standards are versus what they expect of other people. Because the way I see it, for example, anyone can play what they want because they like it or because they want to win. I think that if you're playing it like a regional or YCS, it makes sense to play a meta deck, the deck that gives you the best chance of victory. And I will not blame anyone for that. If I go to a YCS like Atlanta this weekend, meet me there, and I play against like nothing but Pendulum Magicians every single round, and I go like 0-5 or something, I'm not gonna be mad at those people for playing Pendulum Magicians. I might not like the matchup, I might not, you know, have played it myself, but I don't like shame anyone for playing what they want to play. And by the same token, I mean, I think you can kind of just play whatever you want at any event. I do think that like you should change your expectations. So like I said, at a regional or YCS, it makes more sense to expect meta decks, and you shouldn't get mad at people who are at these events playing to win for like playing meta decks. That doesn't make them sheep. I mean, that just means that they're doing the thing that gives them the best chances of winning. But now what about locally? Do you feel like, do you have like a code of honor at locals? Because I know for some people, they will only play fun decks at locals, and they kind of get mad when people at like just weekly locals are playing like hard, you know, cookie cutter meta decks with optimized side decks and extra decks and stuff. I remember at my locals, there were some tournaments where like people wouldn't side deck. Like the best players at the shop, you know, maybe they would side deck, but other people are like, oh, I don't really side at locals. But just because you side at locals, does that mean that like other people can't side at locals? Does that make them like a try hard? You know, like really, I do want to know what people think about this. And then now here's where it gets a little bit like weirder. What soft rules would you flex to win a match? And I don't mean outright cheating, although I guess these technically all are, but like, how much are you going to tell your opponent when something's happening? Like, are you going to remind them to get, you know, certain optional effects in the end phase, like an XX Saber Dark Soul or a Scarm Search, you know? Because obviously certain things are mandatory, stuff like, you know, Gold Sarcophagus, you have to retrieve the card after 2 standby phases. But other effects that just happen in the end phase, I mean, your opponent has to remember to use them. Are you going to let them go back? If they remember somehow, are you going to actively remind them? Because I have met players who have so much integrity as a player that they don't want their opponent to miss like anything optional or not. To what extent is that too far in your mind? And you know, similarly, what do you expect of your opponents? Do you expect your opponent to remind you of all of your optional effects that you can do? Or, you know, like what? Like, do you think your opponent's a dick if they don't? Like, how does that go? Because I feel like, at events, things get a lot more tense and expectations, honestly, like probably should be lower of your opponent. Like, not that they'll so much cheat, but like that you shouldn't expect them to give you anything for free, remind you of anything, you know. Like, what about announcing phases? This is a really tricky one because I know a lot of people are like, you know, will like to just kind of draw their card and then like normal summon a monster. So they'll sort of go from draw phase, standby phase, main phase 1, and they won't even say anything. Like, it's just the monsters in the field and there's a conflict because someone's like, oh, well, I didn't know you were in your main phase yet, or whatever. I meant to use this in your standby phase, anti-spell fragrance or something. So, you know, or Abyss Dweller. And so it's kind of like, well, what do you do? Like, do you announce your phases? Because let's be honest, most people don't. I don't always announce my phases, so I'm not gonna, you know, sit here and parade like I do. Do you announce your phases? Do you expect your opponent to announce their phases? I know, like, for instance, you know, people like Trell, he announces like all his phases. I'm not really one who does that. I don't say like when I only say like when I'm entering the battle phase or going to like end phase, but I don't do like, you know, draw phase, standby phase, main phase, end of main phase, like, you know, that's really not how I play. I don't do it to trick my opponent or to like be elusive, and I try to include it when I think it'll be relevant, but I don't know, like, that's just not really something I do. What about you? Like, is that something that you do? And another thing, and this one's definitely like cheating, are you a cheater? Like, you know, do you draw extra cards? Do you stack your deck? Do you expect your opponents to? Because some people are cynical and they're jaded. They expect their opponent to like cheat at all times. Like, how watchful are you, you know, of your opponent's hand and grave and field and their whole playmat and stuff? Do you expect that your opponent will cheat? I think that it's actually a good practice to be watchful. I wouldn't want to assume my opponent's so bad of a person that they'll cheat, but if I know that they have in the past or they've shown evidence that maybe they would, then definitely watch them. But you should always be watchful. That's just like a good practice. What about, here's another one, Soul Charge. If you've used Soul Charge, are you going to, you know, accidentally enter your battle phase? And if your opponent doesn't notice it, is that wrong? You know, obviously, yes, I think it is. Most would agree that it is, but like, not everybody. People at events do this stuff. And I'm not trying to make this video to like justify that kind of behavior, but really the point that I want people to understand and like take away is that not every Yu-Gi-Oh player holds himself to the same like moral standards, ethical standards, if you will, when playing. And you might think that these people are horrible and they're a douche, but like, the onus is always kind of on you as the player to also be active in interacting with your opponent and being watchful of your opponent, and maybe not expecting your opponent to be as truthful and straightforward and honest and, you know, detailed with every play and stuff as you would be. Do I have any other things? Oh, okay, so, you know, mannerisms, right? Like, some people, you know, do the hand shuffle and like and other people think that's really annoying. Or some people like, you know, will like put their banished pile like right at the end of their mat. I guess I had a mat to do an example, but like, you know what I mean? Like, some people will put their banished pile at the very end of the mat closest to them. I'm not really somebody who likes that. I like to put my banished pile like above my graveyard so that it's more visible to my opponent and I don't feel like there's as much a chance of like cards accidentally getting added back to my hand, because I've seen people do that. You know, what type of mat will you use? Do you use the type of mat that always has like all the zones, like the updated zones, or do you just kind of use custom mats? It doesn't sound like a big deal, but again, these are things like for your opponent's, I guess, courtesy or whatever, sometimes people feel they should do this. They should use the most up-to-date mat. They should use, you know, all this stuff. I don't know. It's because it's kind of an all around the place discussion, but hopefully you get what I mean by all of this. Like, you know, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a game that involves so much interaction and so much decision making, both in and out of game, you know, with the deck that you play, or the way that you announce your moves, or the way that you, like, you know, interact with your opponent. Like, do you look at your opponent? Like, because some people don't even look at the opponent. You know, like, how does that all, like, you know, how do you kind of compartmentalize it all? How do you act, and how do you expect your opponents to act? You know, do you hold your opponents to a lower standard, a higher standard, the same standard? What do you do when, like, strife comes and there's a kind of a conflict of interest? You know, there's really so much about Yu-Gi-Oh! And I think this is just something that doesn't get talked about enough, so I thought I would raise it in a video. You know, it's something that I really want to hear you guys' opinions on. It's not meant to be divisive. I'm not trying to justify cheating. I'm not trying to say that anyone's a tryhard for doing a certain thing. You guys should know by now, I am a firm advocate, and you can quote me on this, of play this game how you want to play it. Use the deck you want to play, use the mat you want to, you know, whatever. Don't let people, like, tell you how to play your deck. Don't let people tell you what to do. But I just mean, like, in terms of how you play the game, it's you, but, like, your opponent is still playing too, and they have kind of different ideas of that. So you have to respect them, or find some kind of way to meet in the middle. That's what I want to know in the comments. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this very spontaneous and not really all that well thought out discussion. Hopefully there's something that you could get from this. But anyway, into video notes, I'm going to be at YCS Atlanta this weekend with Alex, Alec, Chris, and Calvin. I don't think Sheryl's going to be there. I believe he has work, but if something changes, you guys will know. We'll definitely be recording a lot of fun, interesting videos there, assuming it all works out. So that should be great. And I'm also doing the Extreme Force box giveaway that I had alluded to a long time ago, and kind of, there were some difficulties and stuff, but I finally got that back up and going. So the link to enter that will be in the description. It only lasts for a few more days, so be sure that you enter it. You can follow me on Facebook, you can follow me on Twitter, subscribe for more Yu-Gi-Oh! Videos. Hopefully I can get to 100,000 subscribers soon, that'd be nice. Share this if you think this is something that other Yu-Gi-Oh! Players should hear. I think this was a good discussion. I don't know. All right, I've talked long enough. I'll see you guys in the next video. Later.